The hum of Exodus Hub Prime was a persistent, low-frequency ache that lived behind Kaelen Voss's eyes. It was the sound of 3 million tons of pressurized alloy, recycled oxygen, and the desperate hopes of 1,000 different species filtering through a single transit point in the Ocularis Rim. To most, the station was a marvel of post-war cooperation. To Kaelen, it was a giant floating filing cabinet, where he was the only clerk who cared if the drawers were shut properly. He stood at checkpoint Alpha 9, his uniform pressed with a precision that bordered on pathological. His datapad felt like a natural extension of his hand, a slate of glowing glass that currently displayed the disappointing lack of proper documentation for a shipment of synthetic silk from the Orion Spur. Kaelen was 34 years old, but his gray eyes carried the heavy, clouded weight of a man who had seen too many stars go supernova and too many friends turn into stardust. He was built like a retired kinetic assault soldier, shoulders too broad for his desk, a jawline that had survived more than one bar fight on the fringes of space, and a posture that screamed ready for impact, even when he was just ordering synthetic coffee. "Kaelen, you're scaring the tourists again," a voice chirped from the neighboring booth. Kaelen didn't look up. He knew Sola's voice better than his own heartbeat. Sola was his only anchor in this hollowed-out asteroid, a woman who had managed to retain her sense of humor despite spending 5 years smelling the exhaust of every freighter in the quadrant. Her dark hair was buzzed short on the sides, and she wore her security vest open, violating at least 3 station protocols. "I am not scaring anyone, Sola. I am projecting the quiet authority of the Unified Rim Security," Kaelen replied, his voice a dry rasp. "And for the record, this merchant is trying to smuggle 40 crates of unrefined plasma crystals under the guise of textile samples. That's a Class 3 biohazard. He should be scared." Sola leaned against the partition, her grin widening. "You've got a real gift for taking the fun out of smuggling, Voss. Why don't you take 5? The big show is about to start. You know, the one with the glowing people and the fancy ships?" Kaelen finally glanced at the overhead monitors. The diplomatic schedule was flashing gold. Matriarch Xylanthia and the heir apparent, Nyx, were due to arrive in exactly 15 minutes. It was a high-stakes meeting meant to solidify the mining rights of the Velonis Prime Cluster. The Velrin were a delicate, luminous race whose culture was built on harmony, tradition, and a terrifying ability to manipulate sonic frequencies. To Kaelen, they were just another group of VIPs who would require 300 pages of security clearances and an extra cleaning crew for the docking bay. "I've got 47 outstanding manifests and a faulty atmospheric processor in Sector 4, Kaelen said, tapping his datapad with clinical efficiency. "Royalty is just bureaucracy with better jewelry. I'll stay here and make sure no one brings a localized black hole into the food court." "You're such a buzzkill," Sola laughed, though her eyes softened with genuine concern. "Seriously, Kaelen, check 6. You've been looking peaky lately. When was the last time you slept for more than 4 hours?" "Tuesday," Kaelen muttered. "It's Friday, Voss." The comm system crackled, cutting off his rebuttal. The voice of Terminal Director Vane echoed through the bay, dripping with a forced, oily enthusiasm that Kaelen despised. "Attention all personnel. The Velrin Royal Transport. The luminous cord has entered our gravitational well. All security teams to primary positions. Code Silver protocol is now active. Let's show our guests the best humanity has to offer." Kaelen sighed, the sound lost in the sudden surge of activity around the terminal. Maintenance crews began frantic, last-minute polishing of the docking clamps. The station's automated cleaning drones hummed louder, spraying the scent of artificial pine over the lingering smell of ozone and burnt grease. Kaelen watched the luminous cord approach on the main display. It was a beautiful, organic thing, looking more like a translucent seashell carved from a nebula than a ship of war. Its hull pulsed with bioluminescent light, shifting from a soft violet to a deep, resonant amber as it aligned with the docking ring. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy metallic thud that Kaelen felt in his teeth. He checked his datapad. Pressure equalization, 100%. Atmospheric mix, 70% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, 10% Velrin-specific trace gases. Everything was by the book. He should have stayed in his booth. He should have let the ceremonial guards handle the greeting, but his gut, the part of him that was still a soldier, felt a sudden, icy prickle. He looked at the secondary scanners. The ones he'd calibrated himself to bypassed the station's often glitchy primary sensors. A small group of maintenance workers was approaching Docking Bay 7 Alpha from the lower maintenance tunnels. They were wearing standard-issue jumpsuits, but they were moving with a synchronized predatory grace that Kaelen recognized instantly. It was the movement of a breach team. "Sola, get the director on a private channel," Kaelen said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the sharp tool it had once been. "What is it?" Sola's smile vanished. She saw the change in him. The board clerk was gone. The rim guard officer was back. "Maintenance Team Delta. They're not on the roster for today, and their heat signatures are too high for baseline humans. They're wearing internal thermal dampeners." Kaelen was already moving, his hand reaching for the stun baton at his hip, the only weapon a Tier 2 clerk was allowed to carry. "Kaelen, wait for backup!" Sola shouted, but he was already through the security gate. The airlock of the luminous cord hissed open, revealing a mist of iridescent vapor. Matriarch Xylanthia stepped out first, a tall, regal figure with skin like frosted glass and eyes that held the depth of ancient oceans. Behind her was Nyx. Even from 50 meters away, Kaelen noticed her. She was smaller than her mother, her movements more tentative, her ear frills twitching with what Kaelen realized was a nervous vibration. She looked like a being caught between two worlds, a fragile light in a station built of cold, unfeeling metal. The ceremonial greetings began. The director was bowing, his voice a melodic trill of diplomatic platitudes. The matriarch was responding with a soft, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate the very air. It was a scene of perfect, manufactured peace. Then Kaelen saw the lead maintenance worker reach into his equipment bag. It wasn't a wrench he pulled out. It was a compact ion grenade. "Down! Everyone down!" Kalen's voice tore through the ceremonial silence like a gunshot. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He simply moved. He was 10 meters from the royal party when the grenade was tossed. Time seemed to stretch into a series of jagged, high-definition snapshots. He saw the grenade arc through the air, a silver sphere humming with lethal energy. He saw the confusion on the matriarch's face. He saw Nyx freeze, her eyes wide as she registered the threat. Kaelen launched himself forward. His boots pounded against the polished floor, the sound a sharp staccato against the sudden silence. He caught Nyx around the waist, his weight carrying them both toward a reinforced cargo container as the world turned into white, screaming light. The explosion wasn't just heat and fire. It was a wall of concussive sound that felt like being hit by a freight train. Kaelen felt his ribs snap, a familiar, dull crunch, as he slammed into the deck, shielding Nyx with his own body. Shrapnel hissed over their heads, embedding itself in the alloy walls with the sound of angry hornets. He felt a searing heat across his right arm, the smell of charred fabric and scorched skin filling his lungs. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the secondary explosions. The maintenance tunnels were being vented. Alarms began to wail, a frantic, two-tone scream that signaled a station-wide breach. Kaelen rolled onto his back, gasping for air that felt like liquid lead. He looked down at the girl beneath him. Nyx was staring at him, her pale skin covered in a fine layer of gray dust, her violet eyes wide with a shock that transcended language. "Are you hurt?" Kaelen managed to choke out, the words tasting like copper. Nyx didn't answer. She reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the bleeding gash on his forehead. Her touch was cold, like silk dipped in ice water. Her ear frills were vibrating at a frequency so high it made Kalen's teeth ache. "Kaelen!" Sola was there, her face a mask of terror. Behind her, the station's actual security teams were finally arriving, their pulse rifles humming as they engaged the fleeing assassins. "You idiot! You absolute glorious idiot!" Kaelen tried to stand, but his legs decided they were no longer interested in supporting his weight. The world began to tilt, the overhead lights spinning into long, luminous streaks. He saw the matriarch standing over them, her face no longer calm. She looked at Kaelen, her eyes narrowing as they tracked the blood dripping from his arm onto the royal robes of her daughter. "He saved her," the matriarch whispered, her voice a resonant vibration that seemed to anchor Kalen's slipping consciousness. The human spilled his essence to preserve the line. "Kaelen, stay with me!" Sola was screaming now, but her voice was fading, becoming part of the hum of the station. Kaelen Voss closed his eyes, his last coherent thought a bitter irony. He had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to hide from the violence of his past. And here he was, bleeding out on a polished floor, his life once again defined by a single, impulsive act of heroism. He hated heroism. It was messy, it was painful, and it never ever came with a proper filing system. The darkness that claimed him wasn't cold. It felt like a warm violet sea, humming a song that he didn't understand. But for the first time in years, the ache behind his eyes was finally gone. The afterlife was surprisingly iridescent, and it smelled faintly of night-blooming jasmine and sterilized medical supplies. Kaelen Voss opened his eyes to a ceiling that looked like it had been grown rather than built. It was a smooth, pearlescent surface that shifted colors from a soft morning sky blue to a deep royal indigo, depending on how he tilted his head. There were no exposed conduits, no flickering industrial lights, and no hum of a struggling atmospheric processor. The silence was absolute, a heavy velvet quiet that felt like being submerged in deep space without the fear of suffocation. He tried to sit up, and his nervous system immediately filed a formal protest. A jagged lightning bolt of pain shot from his ribs to his skull, forcing a strangled groan from his throat. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "The doctors said you're held together by sheer stubbornness and 3 types of alien biotechnology." Kaelen turned his head slowly. Sola was sitting in a chair that looked far too comfortable for a hospital room. She looked exhausted, her usual spark replaced by deep circles under her eyes, but she was holding a cup of real coffee. The smell was the most beautiful thing Kaelen had ever encountered. "Where?" His voice was a dry rattle. "The Velrin Medical Wing," Sola said, leaning forward. She handed him a small cup of water. "Drink, slowly. You've been out for 4 days, Voss. People were starting to take bets on whether you'd ever wake up." Kaelen took a sip, the cool liquid soothing his ravaged throat. "The girl? Nyx? Princess Nyx is fine. A few bruises, mostly to her ego. You, on the other hand, decided to play human shield with a Tier 4 ion grenade. You've got 3 cracked ribs, a grade A concussion, and your right arm looks like a topographical map of a disaster zone." Sola's voice wavered for a second before she regained her smirk. "But hey, the Velrin medical tech is incredible. They use some kind of cellular reconstruction gel on you. You're going to have a scar, but you'll keep the arm." Kaelen leaned back into the pillows, which felt like they were made of clouds. "The assassins? 6 of them, separatists from the Velrin Outer Rim. They didn't want the mining treaty to go through. They're all either dead or in deep freeze in the station's brig. The matriarch is, well, she's something else. She's been here every day, checking your vitals." Kaelen frowned. "The matriarch? Why would a queen care about a level 2 customs inspector?" "Because you did something no one else did, Kaelen. You didn't wait for orders. You didn't check the protocols. You just saved the future of their entire race." Sola stood up as a soft chime echoed through the room, a sound like wind through crystal bells. "And speaking of the royal family, that's my cue to leave. Try to look professional, Voss. Your hair is a mess." "Sola, wait!" But the door, a seamless panel of translucent glass, slid open, and Sola vanished into the corridor with a final, sympathetic wink. Matriarch Xylanthia entered the room. In the soft light of the medical wing, she was terrifyingly beautiful. Her robes were woven from threads of pure light, shifting and shimmering with every movement. Her ear frills were still, positioned in a way that suggested deep, contemplative calm. Behind her stood Nyx. The princess looked different without the royal finery. She wore a simple silver tunic, and her violet eyes were fixed on Kaelen with an intensity that made him want to pull the covers over his head. "Officer Voss," the matriarch said. Her voice wasn't a sound. It was a resonance that vibrated in Kaelen's chest, bypassing his ears entirely. "It is a rare thing for a human to show such clarity of purpose." Kaelen cleared his throat, trying to find his diplomatic voice. "Your Majesty, I was just doing my job. Security protocols dictate that in the event of—" "Do not lie to me with your protocols, human," Xylanthia interrupted, though her tone wasn't unkind. She moved closer, her skin glowing with a faint amber warmth. I have watched the security feeds. You recognized the threat before my own elite guards. You felt the discord in the air before the first spark was struck. You saved my daughter, not out of duty, but out of a fundamental instinct to preserve life. Kaelen looked at Nyx. The princess hadn't moved. She was standing at the foot of his bed, her hands clasped in front of her. Her ear frills twitched once, a tiny nervous vibration. I'm glad she's safe, Kaelen said, and for once he didn't sound cynical. That's all that matters. It is not all that matters, the matriarch said, her voice becoming solemn, heavy with the weight of centuries. In Velran culture, there is a concept called the Kisharan, the soul link. When a being outside the bloodline preserves the life of the heir at the risk of their own essence, they are no longer an outsider. Kaelen felt a cold, sinking sensation in his stomach. He'd studied xenoanthropology in the academy. He knew that not an outsider in Velran terms usually meant something complicated. We are grateful, Officer Voss, the matriarch continued, but gratitude is a human concept. We deal in balance. By our law, the debt you have incurred cannot be paid in credits or marks. It cannot be satisfied with medals or words. Then, how is it paid? Kaelen asked, his grip tightening on the bedsheets. The matriarch looked at her daughter, then back at Kaelen. You have spilled your blood for the Velran crown. You have bound your fate to hers in that moment of fire. Therefore, to maintain the harmony of our line, you must be brought into it. You will be the anchor to her light. Kaelen stared at her. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I think the translation is getting garbled. It sounds like you're saying, you will be my son-in-law, Kaelen Voss, Zalanthiya said, her voice echoing in the small room like a decree from the gods. You will marry Princess Nyx. You will be her protector, her consort, and a prince of the Velran Empire. The silence that followed was so thick it felt like physical pressure. Kaelen looked at Nyx. She was looking at the floor, her ears lowered in a gesture of absolute submission to her mother's will. You're joking, Kaelen whispered. I'm a customs clerk. I live in a 20-square-meter apartment with a leaky atmospheric processor. I drink synthetic coffee and I file paperwork for a living. I am the most unroyal person in this entire nebula. Your status in the human world is irrelevant, the matriarch said, her ear frills beginning to vibrate with a faint, insistent hum of impatience. You are the man who saved the princess. To the Velran people, you are a hero of legend. To our enemies, you are a symbol of the unbreakable bond between our races. The ceremony will be arranged once you have completed your physical recovery. And if I say no, Kaelen's soldier instincts were screaming now. He didn't like being cornered. He didn't like being a pawn. Zalanthia's eyes turned to the color of a stormy sea. To refuse the Kisharan is to declare that the life you saved was not worth the price. It is an insult of such magnitude that it would shatter the peace treaty we have spent 20 years building. Millions of lives depend on this alliance, Officer Voss. Would you trade their peace for your personal preference? Kaelen felt like he was back in the docking bay, watching the ion grenade arc through the air. Only this time, there was no cargo container to hide behind. I need to speak with the princess, Kaelen said, his voice flat. Alone. The matriarch paused, her ear frills twitching in a complex pattern of surprise. After a moment, she nodded. 2 minutes. My daughter will explain the gravity of your new position. With a sweep of her luminous robes, Zalanthiya exited the room. The door hissed shut, leaving Kaelen alone with the girl he had apparently just agreed to spend the rest of his life with. Nyx finally looked up. Her violet eyes were wet, but her expression was one of quiet, fierce determination. She walked to the side of the bed, her movements graceful and silent. You don't want this, Kaelen said, searching her face. You're royalty. You're supposed to marry a duke or a high-frequency singer or someone who isn't me. I was not asked what I wanted, Nyx said, her voice a soft, melodic hum that felt like a secret whispered in the dark. But I saw you in the smoke, Kaelen Voss. I saw you run toward the fire while everyone else was running away. My mother sees a political tool. My people see a hero. I see a man who is terrified but stood his ground anyway. I'm 34, Nyx. I'm tired. I have more scars than stories, Kaelen said, his voice cracking. I'm not the man you think I am. Then you will have to become him, Nyx whispered. She reached out, her cool fingers brushing the back of his hand. The soul link is already formed, Kaelen. Whether we stand before the priests or not, our lives are woven together. You saved me. Now you must help me save my people. Because the people who tried to kill me, they are still out there, and they will try again. Kaelen looked at her hand on his. The contrast was absurd. His skin was tanned, scarred, and rough. Hers was pale, iridescent, and smooth as a polished pearl. They were two different species from two different worlds, brought together by a moment of violent irony. I hate weddings, Kaelen muttered, closing his eyes. So do I, Nyx admitted, a small, sad smile touching her lips. But I think I might hate being dead more. Kaelen sighed, the pain in his ribs a dull reminder of why he was in this bed in the first place. He had spent his whole life trying to maintain order, trying to make sure every manifest was filed and every crate was accounted for. And now his own life was the one manifest he couldn't control. Fine, he said, opening his eyes, but I'm not wearing a dress. Nyx let out a small musical laugh, the first one Kaelen had heard from her. You will wear the armor of a prince consort, Kaelen Voss, and you will look very heroic. I'm going to need a lot more coffee, Kaelen groaned, leaning back into the cloud-like pillows. Outside the medical wing, the stars of the ocularis rim continued to burn, indifferent to the fate of a single human. But inside, the hum of the station felt different. It was no longer a low-frequency ache. It felt like a countdown. Kaelen Voss was no longer a clerk. He was a prisoner of tradition, a hero by accident, and the future husband of an alien princess. He had always believed the universe possessed a sense of irony, but he'd never expected it to be quite this literal. He looked at the iridescent ceiling as it shifted to a deep, contemplative violet. 23,000 words to go, he whispered to himself, a ghost of his old cynical smile appearing. I hope the food is better in the palace. The transition from the clinical, pearlescent comfort of the medical wing to the official prince consort's quarters was less of a move and more of a tactical displacement. Kaelen Voss walked with the slow, deliberate gait of a man whose skeleton was currently held together by expensive alien nanites and a sheer, stubborn refusal to collapse. Every step sent a dull, throbbing reminder through his fourth and fifth ribs, a rhythmic pulse of pain that synchronized perfectly with the low-frequency hum of the station's life support. He was flanked by two Velran attendants whose names he couldn't pronounce, and whose faces remained masks of translucent serenity. They didn't walk, they drifted, their robes of woven light leaving faint, shimmering trails in the air, like the wake of a ghost ship. Kaelen, in his scuffed security boots and a borrowed tunic that fit him like a coarse burlap sack, felt like a grease stain on a silk sheet. We're here, sir, one of the attendants hummed. The vibration resonated in Kaelen's sternum, a sensation he was quickly learning to associate with the Velran version of a polite notification. The doors to the quarters didn't slide or swing. They unraveled like the petals of a night-blooming flower. Kaelen stepped inside and immediately felt the urge to turn around and find a broom closet to hide in. The room was massive, a cathedral of organic architecture that seemed to breathe with its own internal rhythm. The walls were a deep, resonant amber, carved with thousands of intricate lines that Kaelen realized were vibration scribes, the recorded history of a race that saw sound as a permanent record. Great, Kaelen muttered, his voice sounding small and raspy in the vast space. I'm living inside a giant history book. Don't mind me, I'll just be over here trying not to spill coffee on the 15th century. The matriarch has ensured that all amenities are calibrated to human biological requirements, Prince Consort, the second attendant hummed, oblivious to his sarcasm. The atmospheric mix is precisely 21% oxygen. The gravity is set to 1.02 Earth standard. The hydration station offers 47 varieties of nutrient-enriched liquids. Do any of those varieties taste like burnt beans and regret? Kaelen asked, leaning heavily against a desk that felt more like a petrified tree than furniture. The attendants exchanged a brief silent vibration of their ear frills, a gesture Kaelen was starting to recognize as the human is being difficult again, and bowed low before retreating. The door unraveled shut, leaving him alone in the shimmering silence. Kaelen sank into a chair that immediately adjusted its density to support his injured ribs. He closed his eyes, his mind spiraling back to the docking bay. The heat, the white light, the feeling of Nyx's fragile weight against his chest. He'd spent 10 years in the Rim Guard, 3 of them on the front lines of the Ion Wars, and he'd survived by following one simple rule. Don't get involved. He was the guy who checked the manifests. He was the guy who stayed behind the reinforced glass. He was the invisible man in the gray uniform. And now, because of one 10-second window of impulse, he was the most famous man in the Ocularis Rim. A soft, rhythmic tapping at the door pulled him out of his spiraling thoughts. It wasn't the chime of an attendant. It was a manual knock. 3 short raps, followed by a pause. "It's open," Kaelen called out, sitting up straighter than his doctor would have liked. Nyx stepped into the room. She wasn't wearing the silver tunic from the medical wing. She was dressed in formal Velrin regalia, a complex arrangement of crystalline plates and silk that made her look like a warrior queen from a forgotten myth. But her eyes, those deep violet pools, looked just as haunted as Kaelen's. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Kaelen said, attempting a lopsided smile. "In a sense, I am," Nyx replied. She didn't hum her words. She spoke them in careful, practiced English, her accent a haunting melody of vowels and soft consonants. "The High Council meets in 2 hours. They are skeptical of my mother's decree. They see a human clerk, and they see a vulnerability. They think the soul link is a fabrication to hide a political blunder." Kaelen stood up, his ribs groaning in protest. "Listen, Nyx, we don't have to do this. Your mother talked about a debt, about blood and essence. But this is the 31st century. People don't get handed over like cargo because of a law written when we were still throwing rocks at each other." Nyx walked toward him, her movements fluid and silent. She stopped 2 meters away, her ear frills twitching with a frantic, silver vibration. "You do not understand, Kaelen. To the Velrin, the soul link is not just a law. It is a biological imperative. When you saved me, you didn't just preserve my body, you harmonized your frequency with mine. If we reject the bond, the resonance will eventually shatter us both. It is not a metaphor, it is physics." Kaelen rubbed his face with his hands. "Physics? Right. Of course it is. Everything in this quadrant is either a miracle or a death sentence." "I did not come here to argue the science," Nyx said softly. She reached up and unlatched the crystalline plate at her throat. "I came to show you why I cannot marry a Velrin noble, or anyone else the council would choose for me." She stepped closer, into the pool of light emanating from the center of the room. As the light hit her skin, Kaelen saw it. Beneath the translucent layers of her neck and shoulders, the carbon lattice of her skeletal structure was fractured. A network of jagged, silver cracks ran through her collarbone and up toward her jaw. "The attack on the transport wasn't the first," Nyx whispered. 2 years ago, a separatist cell detonated a sonic pulse in the gardens. I survived, but my internal resonance was shattered. I am flawed, Kaelen. In Velrin society, a ruler must be a perfect conductor of harmony. If the council knew the extent of my damage, I would be stripped of my title and sent to the Silent Moons. Kaelen stared at the silver cracks beneath her skin. He'd seen similar wounds on soldiers who had been too close to a gravity well collapse. It was a miracle she could even stand, let alone move with such grace. The soul link with you, it stabilized me, she continued, her voice trembling. Your biology is dense, chaotic, and incredibly resilient. You are the dampener my system needs to keep the fractures from spreading. My mother didn't just choose you because you were a hero. She chose you because you are a shield. Kaelen felt a sudden, sharp pang of empathy that cut through his cynical armor. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, before he realized what he was doing and pulled back. So we're both broken, Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. I've got a head full of ghosts and enough scar tissue to map a continent, and you're held together by a prayer and a human battery. Nyx looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his. Is that so terrible? To be broken together? It's a hell of a foundation for a marriage, I'll tell you that much, Kaelen said, a genuine laugh bubbling up in his chest. Most people start with a dinner and a movie. We're starting with a biological necessity and an assassination attempt. Nyx's ear frills stilled. turning a soft, warm amber. I find your human humor grounding. It is like a low-frequency hum that clears the air. That's just the sound of me overthinking everything, Kaelen replied. He sat back down, gesturing for her to do the same. All right, princess, if we're doing this, if we're really going to stand in front of your council and tell them I'm the new prince of the galaxy, we need a plan. And we need to get our story straight. Because if I'm going to be your shield, I need to know exactly what I'm guarding. Nyx sat on the edge of the petrified wood desk, her crystalline plates clinking softly. The council will try to provoke you. They will test your knowledge of our songs, our history, and our frequencies. They want to prove you are a squid, a bottom feeder with no soul. A squid? Is that the best insult they've got? Kaelen grinned. I've been called a gearhead and a dust crawler by people much meaner than a Velryn elder. Don't sweat the small stuff, Nyx. I can handle a few grumpy old men in glowing bathrobes. It is not just about the insults, Kaelen, Nyx said, her expression darkening. There is a faction, the Harmonizers, who believe that any union with a human is an abomination. They have been whispering in the dark for a long time. The attack at the docking bay? I believe it was sanctioned by someone within the palace. Kaelen's eyes sharpened. The clerk was gone. The soldier was back. Who has the most to gain if you don't make it to the throne? General Var, Nyx said, her ear frills turning a sharp, icy blue. He is the matriarch's cousin. He believes the Velryn should return to our roots as conquerors. He hates the humans. He hates the Alliance. And he hates that a broken girl is standing in his way. Kaelen nodded, his mind already mapping the tactical situation. So, we've got a general who wants to turn the quadrant into a war zone, a council that thinks I'm a bottom feeder, and a marriage that's literally a matter of life and death. Did I miss anything? Only the ceremonial combat, Nyx added helpfully. Kaelen froze. The what? A formality, she said, though she didn't look at him. To prove the human spirit is worthy of the soul link, you will have to face Var's champion in the arena. It is not to the death. Usually. Kaelen leaned his head back against the density-shifting chair and stared at the pearlescent ceiling. Of course, ceremonial combat. Why would it be anything else? I'm sorry, Kaelen, Nyx whispered. Don't be, he said, closing his eyes. I spent 3 years filing manifests. I was bored out of my mind. I guess I should have been careful what I wished for. He reached out, and this time, he didn't pull back. He let his hand rest on her silver tunic-clad arm. Her skin was cool, but he could feel the faint, rhythmic vibration of her heart. It was a strange, alien rhythm, but as he sat there in the silence, he felt his own pulse begin to slow, matching hers beat for beat. Maybe it wasn't just physics. Maybe it was something else, something that didn't have a name in either of their languages yet. Go get ready for your council, Kaelen said softly. I'll be here, reorganizing my thoughts into alphabetical order. Nyx stood up, her ear frills turning a radiant violet. I will return for you at 1800 hours. Try not to reorganize too much, Prince Consort. As the door unraveled shut behind her, Kaelen let out a long, shaky breath. He looked at his datapad sitting on the desk. He had 12 unread messages from the station director and a notification that his laundry was ready for pickup at Sector 4. Sorry, Vane, Kaelen muttered to the empty room. I think I'm going to be a little busy for the next lifetime. By the time 1800 hours rolled around, Kaelen Voss had managed to do 3 things. Consume 4 liters of a blue liquid that tasted like fermented electricity, successfully navigate the sonic shower without accidentally deafening himself, and convince his ribs to stop screaming every time he drew a deep breath. He stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, or at least a Velryn approximation of one, staring at the man reflecting back. The Velryn attendants had returned an hour ago with his ceremonial attire. It wasn't the silk and crystalline plates Nyx wore. It was a suit of tactical formal wear, made from a midnight blue weave that felt lighter than air, but had the tensile strength of reinforced carbon. It looked like something a high-ranking officer would wear to a funeral or a very expensive execution. You look like you're heading to a gala on a gunship, a voice said from the doorway. Kaelen turned to see Sola leaning against the unraveled portal. She was carrying a small, thermal-insulated bag, and she looked like she'd crawled through 10 kilometers of ventilation ducts to get there. Sola? How the hell did you get past the royal guard? Please, she scoffed, walking into the room and tossing the bag onto the desk. Those guys move like they're in a slow-motion ballet. I just waited for the frequency shift in their patrol cycle and walked right through. Besides, I told them I was the prince consort's official liaison. They're too polite to call me a liar. She opened the bag, and the aroma of actual, honest-to-God, greasy street food filled the room. Kaelen felt his knees go weak. Are those synthesized pork buns from Sector 7? And a double-shot espresso with zero nutritional value, Sola said, handing him a bun. I figured you were starving for something that didn't taste like a science experiment. Kaelen took a bite, the flavor of salt and fat exploding on his tongue. I could kiss you, Sola. Seriously, I'd marry you instead if it wouldn't start an interstellar war. Don't get mushy on me, Voss, she said, though she sat down and watched him eat with a satisfied smirk. So I've been doing some digging. The station is buzzing. Half the people think you're a hero. The other half think you're a plant by the Velrun to justify a power grab. And your old boss, Director Vane? He's currently trying to figure out how to tax your royal dowry. Kaelen swallowed a mouthful of bun. Tell Vane he can tax my left foot. Sola, things are complicated. Nyx is in trouble. The whole royal line is. This isn't just a political marriage. It's a life support system. Sola's expression turned serious. I saw the feeds, Kaelen. The way she looks at you, it's not just gratitude. There's something else there. Something that looks a lot like fear. What's the play? The play is I survived the High Council meeting in an hour, Kaelen said, wiping his hands on a napkin that probably cost more than his old apartment. And then I survive a ceremonial fight with whatever champion General Var throws at me. After that, I guess I learned how to be a prince. You? A prince? Sola laughed, but there was a tremor in it. You can't even keep your socks in the right drawer without a color-coded chart, Voss. You're going to be a disaster. I know, Kaelen said softly, but I'm her disaster now. The bells chimed, the real ones this time, announcing the arrival of the royal escort. Sola stood up, her playful demeanor vanishing. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small silver disc. Take this. It's a short-range pulse jammer I modified. If things get hairy in that council chamber, or if the ceremonial combat turns into an actual assassination, hit the center. It'll blow the frequencies of every Velrun in a 10-meter radius. It won't kill them, but it'll give them a hell of a headache and give you 5 seconds to move. Kaelen looked at the disc, then at his friend. Sola, if they catch me with this, it's an act of war. Then don't get caught, she said, pressing it into his hand. Check 6, Kaelen. Always. She disappeared back toward the service tunnels just as the royal guards entered. They were dressed in full combat armor now, their crystalline spears humming with a low, deadly resonance. They didn't speak. They just gestured for him to follow. The walk to the High Council chamber took them through the heart of the Velrun wing. Kaelen saw things he'd only heard about in hushed rumors. Gardens where the plants grew toward the sound of music. Hallways where the walls changed shape to accommodate the mood of the inhabitants. And vast open spaces where Velrun children practiced their songs, their voices creating ripples of light in the air. It was beautiful, it was alien, and it was all balanced on a knife's edge. The council chamber was a massive circular arena made of obsidian-like stone. 12 elders sat on high, floating platforms, their robes of white and gold glowing like miniature suns. At the center of the arena stood matriarch Xylanthia and Nyx. Beside them was a man Kaelen didn't need to be introduced to. General Var was a mountain of a Velrun, his skin a deep, bruised purple, his ear frills jagged and scarred. He wore heavy armor that looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star, and his eyes, a cold, piercing silver, fixed on Kaelen with a hatred that was almost physical. Kaelen Voss of Earth, the matriarch's voice echoed, filling the chamber with its resonant power. Step forward and face the Council of Harmony. Kaelen walked into the center of the arena. Every step felt like he was walking through thick syrup. The elders were projecting a dampening field, a sonic pressure designed to make outsiders feel small, insignificant, and overwhelmed. Kaelen felt the familiar rise of panic in his chest, the old ghost of his PTSD, the feeling of being trapped in a collapsing bunker. He felt a hand touch his. Nyx had moved to his side, her fingers interlocking with his. Instantly, the pressure vanished. The soul link flared to life, a warm golden resonance that surrounded them both, pushing back the council's dampening field. Kaelen felt a surge of strength, his heart rate stabilizing, his vision clearing. He looked at Nyx, and she gave him a tiny, imperceptible nod. "I am Kaelen Voss," he said, his voice booming through the chamber, amplified by the arena's own acoustics. "I stand here by the law of the soul link. What is the council's will?" A tall, withered elder on the central platform stood up. "The will of the council is to determine if the bond is genuine or a convenience of the flesh. A human cannot hear the great song. A human cannot feel the resonance of the stars. How can such a creature be bound to the air of the Velrun? I don't need to hear your song to know when someone is trying to kill your princess," Kaelen snapped, his patience for alien mysticism already at its limit. "And I don't need to feel your stars to know that your alliance is the only thing keeping this quadrant from turning into a graveyard. You want to test me? Test me, but stop pretending this is about music. This is about whether you're brave enough to let an outsider help you fix what's broken." A murmur of shocked vibrations rippled through the council. General Var stepped forward, his crystalline spear thudding against the stone floor. "Words are the refuge of the weak, human," Var growled, his voice a gravelly rumble. "You speak of bravery? Prove it. By the law of the Kisharan, I challenge the validity of this link. I demand the trial of resonance." Nyx's hand tightened on Kaelen's. Her ear frills turned a frantic, terrified white. "The trial is not for the consort alone," the elder said, his eyes narrowing. "It is for the link itself. Kaelen Voss and Princess Nyx will enter the resonance chamber. They will be subjected to the Song of the Void. If their bond is true, they will emerge unharmed. If it is a lie, they will be consumed by the silence." "Mother, no!" Nyx cried out, looking toward the matriarch. "He is still injured. The void will shatter him." Xylanthia looked down at her daughter, her expression unreadable. "The law is the law, Nyx. If you wish for this human to stand beside you, you must both prove that your souls are one. Do you accept the challenge, Officer Voss?" Kaelen looked at the general's smug, murderous grin. He looked at the council's cold, judgmental eyes. And then he looked at Nyx. He saw the silver fractures beneath her skin, the fear in her eyes, and the desperate hope she was trying so hard to hide. He thought about the life he'd left behind, the inventory lists, the bad coffee, the loneliness of being the invisible man. And then he thought about the girl who called him her shield. "I accept," Kaelen said, his voice as steady as a mountain. "Bring on your song. I've survived worse than a little silence." General Var's grin widened, revealing rows of sharp, translucent teeth. "We shall see, human. We shall see." As the guards led them toward the heavy, obsidian doors of the resonance chamber, Nyx leaned close to Kaelen. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The Song of the Void. It peels back your mind. It shows you everything you've ever feared. It will find the ghosts in your head, Kaelen." Kaelen squeezed her hand, his fingers brushing the pulse jammer Sola had given him. "Let it try," he said, a grim, reckless light in his eyes. "I've been living with those ghosts for a long time. They're probably bored by now. Just stay close to me, Nyx. Don't let go, no matter what you hear." "I will never let go," she promised. The obsidian doors groaned open, revealing a room of absolute suffocating darkness. No light, no sound, no vibration. It was the void between the stars, brought down into the heart of a space station. As they stepped inside, the doors slammed shut, and the song began. It wasn't a sound. It was a scream that didn't use air. It was a pressure that dug into Kaelen's skull, pulling at his memories like a scavenger picking at a carcass. He saw the fire of the Ion Wars. He saw his teammates falling into the black. He felt the cold, crushing weight of the vacuum. "Kaelen!" Nyx's voice echoed in his mind, thin and distant. "I'm here," he roared back, though he couldn't hear his own voice. He felt her stumbling, her resonance fracturing under the assault. He reached out in the dark, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her into his chest. He stood like a pillar in the storm, his dense human biology absorbing the sonic frequencies that were trying to tear her apart. He focused on the smell of the synthesized pork buns. He focused on Sola's laugh. He focused on the ridiculous alphabetical filing system he'd spent 3 years perfecting. He used the mundane, the ordinary, and the human to create an anchor in the void. And then he felt it. The soul link didn't just flare, it exploded. A wave of violet light erupted from their joined hands, pushing back the darkness, silencing the song. For a moment, they weren't in a chamber. They were standing on a world Kaelen had never seen, a place of violet skies and singing mountains. And they weren't a clerk and a princess. They were just two souls, broken in the same places, holding on to each other because the alternative was too lonely to contemplate. The doors groaned open. Kaelen and Nyx walked out into the council chamber. They were pale, trembling, and covered in a fine sheen of sweat, but they were standing, and their joined hands were glowing with a soft, persistent violet light. The silence in the arena was absolute. The elders stood, their ear frills bowed in a gesture of profound respect. General Var's spear fell to the floor with a hollow clang. The matriarch stood up, a single tear of crystalline light rolling down her cheek. "The bond is proven," she announced, her voice a triumphant song. "The human has endured the void. The soul link is absolute." Kaelen looked at General Var, a cold, hard smile touching his lips. "Like I said, General, I've survived worse than a little silence." As he led Nyx back toward their quarters, Kaelen felt the weight of the pulse jammer in his pocket. He hadn't needed it. He hadn't needed a weapon to survive the void. He had needed a reason to stay. He looked at the girl beside him, and for the first time in 10 years, Kaelen Voss didn't feel like a soldier or a clerk. He felt like a man who had finally found a home, even if that home was currently orbiting a gas giant and filled with people who wanted him dead. "We did it," Nyx whispered, her ear frills turning a warm, joyous amber. "We survived the morning," Kaelen corrected her, though he didn't let go of her hand. "Now we just have to figure out how to survive the wedding." The hum of the station followed them, but it didn't feel like an ache anymore. It felt like a heartbeat. The Unity Gala was less of a celebration and more of a beautifully choreographed interrogation. Under the soaring, translucent arches of the Grand Solarium, the elite of Exodus Hub Prime and the high-ranking nobility of the Velrine Empire moved in a slow, hypnotic swirl of silken light. The air tasted of ionized oxygen and expensive imported nectar, a stark contrast to the smell of recycled grease and industrial coolant Kaelen Voss was used to. Kaelen stood on a raised dais, feeling like a high-tech mannequin. His midnight blue formal armor hummed with a low-level kinetic field, a subtle reminder of the danger that lurked behind every polite vibration. Beside him, Nyx was a vision of crystalline elegance, her robes shifting through shades of royal violet that matched the intensity of her eyes. Her ear frills were held in a position of regal stillness, but through the soul link, Kaelen could feel the frantic, staccato rhythm of her heart. She was a hair's breadth away from a panic attack. "Breathe, Nyx," Kaelen whispered, his lips barely moving. "You're doing great. Just look at the horizon and pretend everyone here is an inventory list." "Human humor is a strange anesthetic, Kaelen," she murmured back, her voice barely a ripple in the ambient music. "They are staring at my fractures. I can feel their resonance scanning me, looking for the discord." "Let them scan. You've got me as a baffle, remember?" He shifted his weight, his boots clicking softly on the obsidian floor. "Think of me as your personal lead-lined wall. Nothing gets through unless I let it." A figure detached itself from the crowd, moving with a predatory grace that made the surrounding Velrine nobles scatter like minnows. General Var was no longer in his combat armor. He wore a heavy charcoal-colored robe that looked like it had been woven from volcanic ash. His scarred ear frills were pinned back, a gesture of formal greeting that felt more like a bared throat before a strike. "The hero of the hour," Var growled, his voice a resonant rumble that set Kaelen's teeth on edge. "And the resilient princess. The station is buzzing with your success in the void. Quite a feat for a dust mop and a broken reed." Kaelen narrowed his eyes. "General, I didn't know you were a fan of theater. I thought you preferred the direct approach. You know, grenades and maintenance tunnels." Var's silver eyes flashed with a cold, murderous amusement. Accusations without evidence are just static in the wind, human. I am merely here to offer a toast to your longevity. In our culture, we have a saying, the brighter the light, the faster the flicker before the dark. Yeah, well, we have a saying too, Kaelen replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous rasp. The bigger the mouth, the easier it is to put a boot in it. Nyx's hand tightened on Kaelen's arm. General Var, your presence is noted. Your toast is unnecessary. The matriarch expects your report on the sector patrols by 2100 hours. Perhaps you should focus on your duties instead of our flicker. Var bowed low, the gesture dripping with insincerity. As you wish, Highness. Enjoy the music while it lasts. The next movement is always the loudest. As the general disappeared back into the crowd, Kaelen felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the pulse jammer Sola had given him. He didn't like the look in Var's eyes. It wasn't just hatred. It was the look of a man who had already pulled the trigger and was just waiting for the bullet to land. He's planning something, Nyx whispered, her ear frills turning a sharp, anxious white. Not a grenade this time. Something fundamental. Sola! Kaelen barked into his hidden comms link, ignoring the shocked looks from a nearby group of Velran countesses. Talk to me. Tell me you're seeing something on the grid. Voss? Static is spiking all over the diplomatic wing. Sola's voice crackled in his ear, sounding distant and distorted. I'm in the sub-level monitoring station. Someone just bypassed the secondary dampening field. Kaelen, the station's resonance is being inverted. It's a sonic scream, aimed directly at the solarium. Get everyone out, now! Kaelen shouted, but he was already too late. The music didn't stop. It transformed. The soft, melodic hum of the Velran instruments suddenly spiked into a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that tore through the air like a jagged blade. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical force, a wall of pure vibration that shattered the crystalline decorations and sent the guests to their knees. For the Velran, the effect was catastrophic. Their sensitive biology, built on harmony and resonance, couldn't handle the discordance. High-ranking nobles began to collapse, their ear frills bleeding, their bodies convulsing as their internal frequencies were torn apart. Nyx let out a strangled cry, her knees buckling. Kaelen caught her, his own dense human ears ringing with a dull, throbbing pain, but he was far more resilient to the attack than she was. He looked at her and saw the silver fractures beneath her skin beginning to glow with a violent, unstable light. Nyx, stay with me, Kaelen roared, pulling her into his chest. It's tearing me open, Kaelen, she gasped, her eyes rolling back. The discord. It's finding the cracks. Kaelen looked around the room. Chaos had consumed the gala. Velran guards were struggling to stay upright, their spears sparking uselessly. In the center of the madness, General Var stood perfectly still, his heavy robe shielding him from the worst of the vibration. He was looking directly at Nyx, his expression one of cold, scientific curiosity. He wanted to see her break. He wanted the world to see her shattered. Not today, you son of a bitch, Kaelen growled. He reached for the pulse jammer, but a sudden explosion from the solarium ceiling sent a rain of reinforced glass and burning debris down onto the dais. A team of Var's elite harmonizers dropped from the rafters, their faces obscured by specialized masks that shielded them from the sonic scream. They weren't using blasters. They were using kinetic whips designed to disable and capture. Kaelen, move! Sola's voice screamed in his ear. The solarium is venting. Sector 3 is going dark. You have to get her to the core. Kaelen didn't wait. He scooped Nyx into his arms, her weight surprisingly light, and bolted for the service entrance behind the dais. A kinetic whip hissed past his ear, narrowly missing his shoulder, but he didn't look back. He slammed his shoulder into the door, bursting into a dark, narrow corridor that smelled of ozone and damp earth. He ran. He ran with a desperation he hadn't felt since the trenches of Veloni's prime. Behind him, he could hear the rhythmic thud of armored boots and the high-pitched shriek of the sonic scream echoing through the vents. The turning point wasn't the explosion or the attack. It was the moment Kaelen Voss realized he wasn't running to save a treaty or a crown. He was running because the girl in his arms was the only thing in the universe that made him feel like he wasn't just a collection of scars and regrets. They reached an elevator shaft, but the controls were dead. Kaelen kicked open the maintenance hatch and looked down into the dark, yawning abyss of the station's industrial bowels. "We have to go down," he said, adjusting his grip on Nyx. Her breathing was shallow, her ear frills limp and colorless. "It's the only way to the core. Var's people won't follow us into the high-rad zones." "Kaelen," Nyx whispered, her eyes fluttering open. I'm a burden. I can't hold my own frequency. Leave me. Save yourself." Kaelen stopped. He looked down at her, his face grimed with soot and blood, his gray eyes burning with a fierce, stubborn light. "Listen to me, Nyx. I spent 34 years being alone. I spent 3 years being a zeroed-out clerk who didn't care if the sun went cold. You're not a burden. You're the first thing in a long time that's felt like an actual choice, and I'm not leaving my choice behind." He stepped into the shaft, his magnetic boots locking onto the rungs of the ladder as he began the long, dangerous descent into the dark. Behind them, the shriek of the station continued, a symphony of destruction that marked the end of the world they knew. The lower levels of Exodus Hub Prime were a graveyard of forgotten machinery and echoing shadows. This was the gutter, a place where the station's elegant Velran architecture gave way to the brutal, utilitarian steel of the original human construction. Here the air was thick with the smell of scorched copper and the rhythmic, wheezing breath of massive atmospheric processors that had been running for 40 years without a break. Kaelen moved through the gloom with the practiced ease of a ghost. He had spent his early years in the rim guard patrolling sectors, just like this, places where the light didn't reach, and the only law was the weight of your pulse pistol. Nyx was awake now, but she was weak, leaning heavily on his arm as they navigated a maze of rusted conduits and hissing steam pipes. "We're 5 kilometers from the primary core," Kaelen said, his voice a low whisper that barely carried over the mechanical roar of the station. "If we can reach the dampening chamber, I can manually reset the station's resonance. It'll kill the sonic scream and give Sola enough time to reboot the security grid." Nyx tripped over a loose floor plate, and Kaelen caught her, his hands steady on her waist. She looked up at him, the dim emergency lighting casting long, jagged shadows across her face. "You know this place, Kaelen. You move like you were born in the dark." "I was born on a colony ship with a failing reactor," Kaelen replied, his eyes scanning the shadows for movement. "Darkness is an old friend. It's the light that usually brings the trouble." They ducked behind a massive cooling tank as a pair of seeker drones hummed overhead, their red sensor eyes sweeping the corridor with clinical precision. Kaelen held his breath, his hand resting on the hilt of his stun baton. He felt Nyx's hand find his, her fingers cold and trembling. Through the soul link, he could feel her fear, not for herself, but for the discord she felt she was bringing to him. "You think I'm broken," she whispered, her voice a fragile vibration in his mind. "My mother sees a conductor. Var sees a weapon. But down here, in this place of metal and oil, I am just a glitch in your system." Kaelen pulled her closer, the heat of his body acting as a shield against the damp chill of the gutter. "You want to talk about glitches? Nyx, look at me. I've got a prosthetic plate in my shin, 2 fused vertebrae, and a memory bank full of people I couldn't save. I'm not a system. I'm a wreck that someone slapped a coat of blue paint on." "But you are whole," she argued, her ear frills twitching with a faint violet spark. "You don't need a soul link to keep your heart beating." "Maybe not my heart," Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a level of honesty that terrified him. "But my soul? That's a different story. Before I saved you at that docking bay, I was just waiting for my shift to end, for the rest of my life to end." "You didn't just give me a prince's title, Nyx. You gave me a reason to check my 6. He looked her in the eye, ignoring the red sweep of the drones nearby. "Being broken isn't the problem. The problem is thinking you have to fix it alone. Down here, nothing is perfect. That pipe over there? It's been patched 12 times. That processor? It's missing 3 teeth on its primary gear. But they're still running. They're still keeping this station alive. That's what we are. We're the patches that keep each other running." Nyx stared at him, her violet eyes widening as the weight of his words sank in. For a moment, the fear in her resonance softened, replaced by a warm, golden glow of realization. She reached up, her fingers brushing the scar on his forehead. A human philosopher once said that there is a crack in everything, she murmured. That is how the light gets in. Serenoi. He was probably an inventory clerk, Kaelen grunted, but he couldn't hide the small, lopsided smile that touched his lips. The drones passed, their red lights fading into the distance. Kaelen gestured for them to move, but as they stepped into the next junction, the world suddenly exploded into a blinding white strobe. Bug out! Kaelen roared, shoving Nyx into a narrow crawl space just as a volley of kinetic bolts tore through the air where they had been standing. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, Var's elite silent echoes. They were armored in matte black suits that absorbed the dim light, and they moved with a synchronized lethality that made Kaelen's blood run cold. They weren't here to capture. They were here to sanitize. Stay down, Kaelen barked at Nyx. He didn't have a rifle. He didn't have a kinetic shield. All he had was a stun baton, a pulse jammer, and a decade of experience in fighting dirty. The first echo lunged, his kinetic blade glowing with a pale, lethal blue. Kaelen stepped inside the strike, his movement a blur of calculated violence. He slammed his palm into the echo's throat mic, disrupting his internal comms, and followed up with a brutal strike from his stun baton to the back of the knee. As the assassin buckled, Kaelen grabbed his arm and used the momentum to hurl him into the second echo. But the third one was faster. A kinetic bolt caught Kaelen in the side, spinning him around. He felt the familiar, hot sting of a graze, the smell of scorched fabric filling his nostrils. He hit the deck, rolling behind a rusted terminal as the echoes opened fire again. Kaelen! Nyx screamed from the crawl space. I'm fine, just a scratch, Kaelen yelled back, though his side felt like it had been branded with a hot iron. He was pinned. The echoes were moving in, their movements cold and professional. They knew they had him. Kaelen looked at the terminal. It was an old manual override for the sector's steam valves. He looked at the echoes, then at the valves overhead. Hey, static heads, Kaelen roared, standing up and exposing himself. You want the princess? Come and get her. The echoes shifted their focus, their weapons tracking toward him. In that split second, Kaelen slammed his fist into the emergency release of the terminal. The result was a violent, high-pressure eruption of superheated steam. A wall of white vapor blasted into the corridor, obscuring everything in a blinding, scorching fog. The echoes stumbled back, their thermal sensors overwhelmed by the sudden heat. Kaelen didn't wait. He launched himself through the steam, guided not by sight, but by the resonance of the soul link. He could feel Nyx's heartbeat, her frequency acting as a beacon in the whiteout. He found the first echo and drove his stun baton into the gap in his armor. The man collapsed with a strangled cry. The second one tried to swing his blade, but Kaelen was already under his guard, delivering a crushing blow to his solar plexus. The third echo turned to flee, but a sudden, high-pitched hum filled the corridor. Nyx had stepped out of the crawl space, her hands outstretched, her ear frills vibrating with a violent, violet intensity. She wasn't screaming, she was focusing. She was taking the discord within her and projecting it outward. The echo froze, his body convulsing as the concentrated sonic frequency shattered his internal sensors. He hit the floor like a sack of stones, his armor sparking. Silence returned to the corridor, broken only by the hiss of escaping steam. Kaelen slumped against the wall, gasping for air, his hand pressed to the bloody gash in his side. He looked at Nyx and saw her standing there, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, beautiful light. She looked like a goddess of the void. Nyx, he managed to say. The light faded from her eyes and she collapsed. Kaelen caught her before she hit the floor, his own strength flagging. I did it, she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. I used the cracks, Kaelen. I didn't try to hide them. I let the discord out. You were amazing, Kaelen said, his voice thick with pride. He pulled her into his lap, ignoring the pain in his side. You're a hell of a shield, princess. They sat there in the dark, surrounded by the steam and the fallen assassins. The turning point was complete. They weren't just a prince and a princess bound by law. They were 2 damaged people who had looked into the abyss and decided that, as long as they were together, the abyss didn't stand a chance. We have to keep moving, Kaelen said, forcing himself to stand. He helped Nyx up, his arm around her shoulders. The core is just 2 levels down. We can still stop this. Kaelen, Nyx said, stopping him. She looked at the blood on his hand, then up at his face. If we don't make it, if the station falls... We're making it, Kaelen interrupted, his jaw set in a hard, stubborn line. I've got a wedding to attend, remember? I hear the food is going to be spectacular. Nyx laughed, a soft musical sound that seemed to chase away the shadows of the gutter. You are an impossible human, Kaelen Voss. Yeah, well, I'm your impossible human, he said, pulling her close. Now let's go save this bucket of bolts before Vane tries to charge us for the steam. As they moved deeper into the industrial heart of the station, the hum of the core grew louder, a deep, rhythmic throb that felt like the heartbeat of a giant. They were tired, they were bleeding, and the odds were stacked against them. But for the first time in his life, Kaelen Voss wasn't counting the cost. He was just counting the steps. 1 step, 2 steps, 42 steps to the next junction. The lesson was beginning to take root in the cold, dark metal of the station. Family wasn't about the blood you shared or the laws you followed. It was about the person who stood in the steam with you when everyone else was running for the lifeboats. And Kaelen Voss was realizing that he had finally found his family, 5 light years from home, in the middle of a dying space station. They reached the final airlock to the core. Kaelen pressed his palm to the scanner, his heart hammering against his cracked ribs. Ready? He asked. Nyx took a deep breath, her ear frills turning a steady, resilient violet. Ready? The airlock hissed open, revealing a chamber of blinding, golden light. In the center, the station's primary core was spinning wildly, its resonance out of control, a sun trapped in a cage of glass. And standing in front of the console, his silhouette dark against the brilliance, was General Var. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he had been waiting for them. The clerk and the cripple, Var said, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. You've come just in time to watch the harmony break, and this time, human, there is no one left to catch the grenade. Kaelen stepped forward, his stun baton humming, his hand tightening on Nyx's. The battle for the station was about to begin, but as Kaelen looked at Var, he didn't feel fear. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. I'm not here to catch it, Var, Kaelen said, his voice echoing through the golden light. I'm here to throw it back. The station groaned, a deep, structural sound of failing metal. But Kaelen Voss didn't flinch. He had his shield. He had his choice, and he was ready to fight for both. The heart of Exodus Hub Prime was a cathedral of golden gravity. The primary resonance core, a sphere of hyperdense matter suspended in a magnetic lattice, spun with a fury that made the very air shimmer with heat. It was the sun of the station, the engine that kept 3 million people breathing in the vacuum, and right now it was screaming. Not in a way the human ear could hear, but in a way that rattled Kaelen Voss's teeth and made the silver fractures in Nyx's skin glow with a painful, erratic light. General Var stood at the primary console, his massive silhouette framed by the golden brilliance. He looked like a god of the old wars, his hand hovering over the frequency modulators that were currently tearing the station's harmony apart. He didn't turn when they entered. He didn't need to. The resonance told him exactly who was standing at his back. You are persistent, clerk, Var growled, his voice a deep, resonant vibration that cut through the mechanical roar. I gave you every opportunity to die as a hero in the solarium. Instead, you chose to drag the princess down into the grease and the dark. Is this the human spirit your poets rave about? The stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable end of a broken line? Kaelen stepped forward, his boots clanking on the metal grating. He felt the weight of the soul link, a warm, pulsing thread that connected his heart to Nyx's. He could feel her pain, her exhaustion, and her mounting terror. But he also felt her resolve. She was leaning on him, her hand gripping his arm so hard her knuckles were white, but she was standing. The only thing inevitable here, Var, is that I'm going to shut you down, Kaelen said, his voice raspy but steady. I've seen guys like you before, brass hats who think they can play God because they've got a bigger speaker than everyone else. You're not saving the Velrin. You're just burning the house down because you don't like who's living in the guest room. Var turned then, his silver eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light. The house is already infested, human. The matriarch's peace has made us soft. It has made us weak. We are conductors of the universe's music, yet we have allowed ourselves to be tuned to the discordant noise of your species. To save the Velrun, I must purge the discord. I must reset the frequency. He slammed his fist into the console, and the golden sphere in the center of the room surged. A wave of pure sonic pressure blasted outward, a wall of sound so intense it felt like a physical blow. Kaelen was thrown backward, his cracked ribs screaming in protest as he slammed into a reinforced cooling pillar. Nyx fell to her knees, her ear frills bleeding, her body convulsing as the core's unstable resonance tore at her internal harmony. "Nyx!" Kaelen roared, gasping for air that felt like liquid fire. "She cannot help you," Var said, stepping down from the dais with his crystalline spear held low. "She is a broken instrument. The more she tries to fight, the faster she shatters. Watch, human. Watch as your choice falls apart before your eyes." Var lunged, the spear tip humming with a lethal blue energy. Kaelen rolled to the side, the blade missing his head by a fraction of an inch and biting into the pillar with a shower of sparks. Kaelen didn't have a weapon that could match a Velrun general's strength, but he had the gutter's own architecture. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby maintenance rack and swung it with everything he had. The metal clashed against the crystalline spear, the vibration traveling up Kaelen's arm and nearly numbing his hand. He was outmatched, outclassed, and running on fumes, but he wouldn't back down. This was the moment his life had been building toward. Not the heroics of the war, but the quiet, stubborn refusal to let someone he cared about be treated like a broken machine. "You think she's a weakness?" Kaelen spat, ducking under another sweep of the spear. "You think being perfect is the only way to lead? You're a total wash, Var. You're so focused on the music you've forgotten how to hear the people." He reached into his pocket and pulled out Sola's pulse jammer. It was a one-shot gamble, a small piece of human tech against the pinnacle of Velrun engineering. He hit the center button and hurled it at the base of the core. The jammer didn't explode in fire. It exploded in static. A sphere of localized electromagnetic interference erupted, clashing with the core's resonance and creating a momentary pocket of silence in the sonic storm. Var stumbled, his internal sensors suddenly blinded. The Velrun, so reliant on their connection to the frequency, were momentarily paralyzed by the absolute quiet. "Now, Nyx!" Kaelen yelled. Nyx looked up, her violet eyes burning with a desperate, beautiful light. She understood. She didn't try to find the harmony. She didn't try to fix her fractures. She did exactly what she had done in the gutter. She embraced the discord. She stood up, her ear frills vibrating at a frequency that was jagged, sharp, and utterly unique. She wasn't singing a song of peace. She was singing a song of the cracks. The sound she produced was unlike anything the Velrun had ever heard. It was raw, human, and filled with the resonance of her survival. It hit the core's unstable field, and instead of fighting it, it merged with it. The golden sphere began to change color, the brilliant amber softening into a deep, resilient violet. Var screamed, his hands clutching his head as Nyx's frequency tore through his perfect internal harmony. His spear fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 crystalline shards. This is an abomination!" Var gasped, his skin turning a sickly, mottled gray. "No," Nyx said, her voice a resonant vibration that seemed to fill every corner of the chamber. "It is the future. It is a choice you were too afraid to make." She stepped toward the console, her hands glowing with the same violet light as the core. With a final, decisive movement, she slammed her palms onto the frequency modulators. The sonic scream died instantly. The station's resonance stabilized, not in the old fragile harmony, but in a new, robust frequency that incorporated the discordance. The lights in the chamber dimmed to a soft, pulsing amber, and the mechanical roar faded to a steady, comforting hum. Var collapsed, his body spent, his mind shattered by the very frequency he had tried to weaponize. Kaelen scrambled to his feet, his side bleeding, his ribs aching, and caught Nyx as she slumped forward. "We did it," he whispered, pulling her into his lap. "You did it, Nyx." She looked up at him, her violet eyes dimming but filled with a peace he had never seen before. "We did it, Kaelen. Together." The chamber was silent now, save for the hum of the core and the ragged breath of two people who had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. Kaelen looked at the golden light and realized that the lesson wasn't just for Nyx. It was for him, too. He had spent his whole life being the invisible man, the shield that took the hits so no one else had to. But standing here in the heart of the station, he realized that he didn't have to be a shield. He just had to be a partner. He leaned his head against hers, the soul link a warm, steady heartbeat between them. They were still in the dark, they were still bleeding, and the palace was still in turmoil. But as Kaelen Voss looked at the girl in his arms, he knew that the inventory of his life was finally complete. He had found the one thing that wasn't for sale, and he wasn't ever letting it go. Recovery was a slow, agonizing process that involved too many Velrun doctors and not nearly enough actual coffee. 2 days after the confrontation at the core, Kaelen Voss found himself back in the medical wing, though this time the atmosphere was different. The air didn't smell like jasmine and sterilized silence. It smelled like the aftermath of a revolution. The station was in a state of flux. General Var was in deep freeze, awaiting a trial that would likely redefine the entire Velrun legal system. The Harmonizer faction had been dismantled, their leaders fleeing into the Outer Rim or surrendering to the Matriarch's guards. And Kaelen was the human prince who had stood in the center of a sonic storm and didn't shatter. He was currently sitting on the edge of his bed, trying to figure out how to put on a formal tunic with one arm in a sling and 3 ribs that still felt like they were being poked by a hot iron. "You're doing it wrong, Voss. Again." Kaelen looked up to see Sola standing in the doorway. She looked surprisingly clean, her security vest replaced by a crisp, new uniform, and she was carrying a tray with 2 cups of dark, steaming liquid. "Sola, tell me that's not blue electricity," Kaelen said, his eyes narrowing. "Double-shot espresso from the Black Hole Cafe in Sector 4, she said, handing him a cup. "I had to pull a lot of strings and promise a certain barista that he wouldn't be audited for the next 50 years, but I figured you earned it." Kaelen took a sip, and the bitter, glorious burn of the coffee made him feel more human than any Velrun nanite ever could. "You're a lifesaver, Sola, in every sense of the word." "Yeah, well, someone had to keep the human prince from making a total fool of himself," she said, sitting in the chair beside his bed. She looked at him for a long moment, the playful smirk fading from her face. "You really did it, didn't you? You didn't just save the girl, you saved the whole bucket of bolts." "Nyx saved the station," Kaelen corrected her. "I just kept the general busy while she figured out how to sing." "Don't give me that modest crap, Kaelen," Sola said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I saw the sensor logs from the core. You were taking hits that would have liquefied a baseline Velrun. You weren't just a shield, you were an anchor. You gave her the stability she needed to find that frequency." Kaelen looked down at his coffee, the dark surface reflecting the amber lights of the room. "She's not a broken instrument, Sola. She's just a different one. We both are." "I know," Sola whispered. "The whole station knows now. The matriarch is calling for a general assembly. She wants to announce the new treaty, one that doesn't just talk about mining rights, but about integration. They're calling it the Voss Accord." "How does that feel for a guy who wanted to be invisible?" "It feels like a lot of paperwork I'm going to have to file eventually," Kaelen grumbled, though he couldn't hide the warmth in his eyes. The door unraveled and Nyx stepped into the room. She was wearing a simple white gown, her ear frills positioned in a gesture of profound joy. She looked stronger, more vibrant, the silver fractures beneath her skin no longer glowing with pain, but with a soft, steady violet light. Sola stood up, offering a respectful nod to the princess. "I'll leave you two to your royal business. Try not to break anything else for at least 48 hours, Kaelen." As Sola exited, Nyx moved to the side of the bed. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and took Kaelen's free hand, her fingers interlocking with his. Through the soul link, Kaelen felt a wave of gratitude and affection that was so powerful it made his breath catch. "My mother wants to see us," Nyx said softly. "The council has reached a decision regarding the Kisharon." Kaelen squeezed her hand. "And? Are they still trying to figure out how to tax our soul link?" Nyx laughed, a musical sound that felt like the first day of spring. "No. They have realized that the bond is not just a biological necessity, it is a choice that transcends the law. They are inviting you to address the assembly, not as a hero, but as a citizen of the Empire. Kaelen looked at her, the reality of his new life finally sinking in. He wasn't going back to checkpoint Alpha 9. He wasn't going back to the gray uniform in the inventory lists. He was staying here, in the light, with the person who had seen his scars and decided they were beautiful. "Nyx, I'm still just a guy from a colony ship," Kaelen said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm still going to overthink things. I'm still going to be a cynical jerk when the coffee's cold." "Are you sure you're ready for that for the next 50 years? Nyx leaned down, her forehead resting against his. "I am ready for every second of it, Kaelen Voss, because a perfect life is just a song without a soul. I would rather have the discord, as long as I am singing it with you." They sat together in the quiet of the medical wing, two people who had found family in the most unexpected of places. Kaelen realized then that the lesson he had been running from his whole life, the idea that he was only as good as the service he provided, was finally dead. He didn't have to be a hero to be loved. He didn't have to be a shield to be worthy. He just had to be himself, flaws and all, and be brave enough to choose the person standing beside him. As they walked together toward the assembly hall, the hum of the station followed them, a steady, resilient heartbeat that echoed the rhythm of their joined souls. Kaelen Voss looked at the stars beyond the transparent aluminum, and for the first time in 34 years, he wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking at where he belonged. "Ready?" Nyx asked, her ear frills turning a radiant violet. Kaelen adjusted his sling, a lopsided, confident grin spreading across his face. "Check 6, Princess. Let's go show them how to sing." The doors to the assembly hall opened, revealing a sea of Velrin and humans, all waiting to hear the new movement in the music of the stars. And as Kaelen stepped onto the stage, he knew that the inventory of his future was finally, perfectly, alphabetically organized. It started with a choice, and it ended with a family. The ringing in Kaelen Voss's ears had finally subsided into a dull, rhythmic thrum, replaced by the persistent, bureaucratic chatter of a station trying to rebuild its soul. 2 days had passed since the confrontation at the core, and Exodus Hub Prime was currently a hive of frantic activity. From the high-rises of the Velrin diplomatic wing down to the grease-stained corridors of the gutter, the Voss Accord was the only topic on anyone's lips. It wasn't just a treaty anymore. It was a legend in the making. Kaelen sat on the edge of a recovery bench in a quiet corner of the botanical gardens, his right arm still strapped in a medical sling that smelled of sterile gel and ancient Velrin herbs. The silver gash on his side had been sealed by nanites, leaving a jagged, pale line that pulsed whenever he breathed too deeply. He was 34 years old, and for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel like a man waiting for his shift to end. He felt like a man who had accidentally started a new one, and the job description was terrifying. "You're doing that brooding thing again, Kaelen. It makes your eyebrows look like two angry caterpillars having a standoff." Sola leaned against a petrified wood trellis, holding two familiar thermal cups. She looked ragged but triumphant, her security vest stained with soot from the sub-level fires she'd spent 48 hours helping to extinguish. She handed him one cup, and the scent of burnt beans and industrial-strength caffeine hit Kaelen like a long-lost friend. "It's not brooding, Sola. It's strategic contemplation," Kaelen grunted, taking a long, appreciative sip. "And for the record, caterpillars are much more organized than my current thoughts." Sola sat beside him, her boots scuffing the iridescent moss. "The brass is going crazy, Voss. Director Vane is currently trying to write a speech that makes him look like he was secretly part of your tactical infiltration of the core. He's calling it a joint species stabilization effort. I told him he should call it the time the clerk saved everyone's ass, but he didn't think it had enough diplomatic weight." Kaelen let out a short, sharp laugh that made his ribs twinge. "Vane would try to tax a supernova if he thought he could get away with it. How are the levels?" "Stabilizing. The new frequency Nyx set. It's different, Kaelen. It's not that old fragile harmony. It's tougher. It's got some grit in it. The technicians are saying the station's structural integrity has actually increased by 12% because the vibrations are less prone to resonance shattering. You two literally made this place stronger by breaking the rules. Kaelen looked at his coffee, the dark liquid swirling in the cup. We didn't just break the rules, Sola. We realized the rules were written for a game nobody wanted to play anymore. General Var, he was so obsessed with a perfect song that he was willing to kill the singers. I spent years thinking that if I just kept my head down and followed the manifests, the universe would leave me alone. I was wrong. Sola reached out, punching him lightly on his good shoulder. Check 6, Voss. You weren't wrong. You were just on standby. Some gearheads need a kickstart before they really rev up. You found your reason to burn hot. She stood up, looking toward the Grand Solarium, where the light of the gas giant was currently painting the station in shades of bruised purple and gold. The matriarch wants the ceremony to proceed at 1800 hours tomorrow. It's not just a wedding, Kaelen. It's the signing of the accord. Human and Velrin, bound together by more than just mining rights and trade routes. They're calling it a family, a chosen one. Family, Kaelen repeated the word, and it felt heavy on his tongue, like a new currency he wasn't sure he could spend. I don't know the first thing about being a royal husband, Sola. I'm a guy who files cargo manifests. And she's a girl who was supposed to be a perfect conductor, but found out she's a warrior instead, Sola said, walking away toward the exit. Stop overthinking it. You didn't save her because she was a princess. You saved her because she's yours. The rest is just paperwork, and you're the best damn clerk in the quadrant. You've got this. As Sola disappeared into the shadows of the garden, Kaelen felt a soft vibration in the air, a resonance he now recognized as easily as his own pulse. Nyx stepped out from behind a stand of singing ferns, her white gown shimmering in the dim light. She looked tired, her violet eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 years of tradition she had just rewritten, but she was smiling. My mother is arguing with the High Council, Nyx said, sitting beside him. Her ear frills twitched with a soft, amused amber light. They want to know if the human portion of the ceremony can include a recitation of the Unified Rim Security Code. They think it is your people's version of a sacred hymn. Kaelen groaned, leaning his head back against the trellis. Please tell me you told them no. I told them it was a possibility, provided the Velrin portion included a 3-hour lecture on the proper organizational structure of a sub-level archive. She teased, her hand finding his. Kaelen squeezed her fingers, his thumb tracing the faint, glowing silver lines on her palm. We really made a mess of things, didn't we? No, Nyx said, her voice dropping to a low, melodic hum that resonated in his chest. We cleared away the debris. For 20 years, our people have lived in the same house but stayed in different rooms, afraid that the floorboards would creak if we moved too close. We finally opened the doors, Kaelen. It is loud, it is messy, and General Var's perfect harmony is gone. But for the first time, I can hear my own voice, and I can hear yours. They sat in the silence for a long time, watching the stars through the transparent aluminum dome. Kaelen thought about the 3 million souls on the station, each one now part of a grand, chaotic experiment. He thought about the blood he'd spilled and the scars he bore. In the military, they called it the cost of doing business. In the gutter, they called it survival. But here, in the quiet of the garden, with Nyx's head resting on his shoulder, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like an investment. I'm choosing this, Nyx, Kaelen said, his voice a whisper in the dark. Not because of the soul link, not because of your mother's prophecy or the blood debt. I'm choosing you because I don't want to see what the next 34 years look like without you. Nyx's ear frills turned a radiant, shimmering violet. I chose you the moment you looked at me in that medical bed and complained about the coffee, Kaelen Voss. I knew then that if a man could be that stubborn about his caffeine while facing a queen, he would be stubborn enough to keep my heart beating. The aftermath of the battle was still visible in the scorched patches on the walls and the flickering lights in the distance. But as Kaelen closed his eyes, he didn't see the fire. He saw the path ahead. It wasn't straight, it wasn't organized, and it definitely wasn't going to follow any manifest he'd ever filed. It was going to be foobar. It was going to be a total cluster cluck of diplomatic errors and cultural misunderstandings. And as Kaelen drifted off into a light, healing sleep, he realized he wouldn't have it any other way. The Grand Solarium had been transformed from a place of tragedy into a theater of hope. The jagged shards of the ceiling had been replaced with new, high-tensile glass that caught the light of the ocularis gas giant, bathing the thousands of guests in a surreal, swirling aura of emerald and gold. Human dignitaries in crisp, dark suits sat alongside Velrin nobles, whose robes hummed with the collective resonance of their joy. Kaelen Voss stood at the head of the long, obsidian aisle, his back straight and his gray eyes focused. He wasn't wearing the tactical formal armor today. Instead, he wore a simple, elegant tunic of Velrin silk dyed the color of a stormy earth sky, with the silver insignia of the rimguard pinned over his heart. It was a fusion of who he was and who he was becoming. Beside him stood Sola, his best man by human tradition and witness of essence by Velrin law. She had managed to find a clean uniform and had even polished her boots, though she still looked like she was ready to pull a pulse pistol if the music got too loud. "Don't trip, Voss," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the harmonic swell of the Velrin choir. "If you fall on your face in front of 3 billion viewers, I'm never letting you live it down. If I trip, it's because the gravity in this wing is set to pompous," Kaelen shot back, though his hands were steady. The music shifted, the high-frequency trills of the choir merging with a deep, rhythmic bass that Kaelen recognized as the new resonance of the station. Nyx appeared at the far end of the solarium, walking toward him with the matriarch at her side. She wasn't hidden behind crystalline plates or ceremonial masks. Her face was open, her violet eyes fixed on Kaelen with a fierce, unwavering light. Her ear frills were positioned in what he now knew was the absolute choice, a gesture that meant she was binding herself not to a crown, but to a person. As she reached him, the matriarch took both their hands. Her skin was warm, glowing with a soft maternal pride that transcended species. "We stand at the edge of a new era," Zelanthia announced, her voice vibrating through the chamber. "Many years ago, we built this station as a gesture of cooperation. But cooperation is just a contract. Today, we move beyond contracts. We move into the realm of the soul link. We recognize that our strength does not come from our similarities, but from the way we support each other's fractures." She looked at Kaelen, her eyes searching his. "Kaelen Voss, do you accept the weight of this union? Do you choose to be the anchor for our light, and to let our light be the guide for your strength?" Kaelen didn't look at the matriarch. He didn't look at the cameras or the thousands of dignitaries. He looked at Nyx, at the girl who had seen him in the grease of the gutter and chosen him anyway. "I choose it," Kaelen said, his voice clear and resonant. "Not as a hero and not as a prince. I choose it as a man who finally understands that a manifest is just a piece of paper, but a promise. A promise is what keeps the stars from going cold." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, humble object. It wasn't a jewel or a relic. It was a handheld data pad, old and slightly scratched. "I don't have a royal treasury to offer," Kaelen said, a small smile touching his lips as a murmur of confusion went through the Velrin crowd. "But I have spent the last 48 hours reorganizing the station's emergency archives. I've created a new system, a bridge between human logic and Velrin resonance. It's a gift to our future, so that when the next storm comes, we don't have to look for the rules. We'll already be standing together." Nyx laughed, a soft musical sound that echoed through the solarium. She took the data pad from his hand, her fingers brushing his. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever been given, Kaelen Voss, a map for our chaos." She turned to the assembly, her voice growing stronger. "I am Nyx of the Velrin, and I choose this human. I choose his scars, his silence, and his stubbornness. I choose a life where we are not perfect, but we are whole. The soul link is not a debt to be paid. It is a gift to be earned every single day." They joined hands, and for a moment, the entire solarium was filled with a brilliant, violet light. It wasn't a blinding explosion, but a warm, steady glow that seemed to emanate from within them. The soul link was no longer a biological necessity or a political decree. It was a living thing, a bridge built of choice and steel. The celebration that followed was a glorious multi-species mess. Human security officers were seen dancing with Velrin scholars. Sola was engaged in a deep animated discussion with the matriarch's lead physician about the tactical applications of cellular reconstruction gel, and Director Vane was somewhere in a corner, looking genuinely overwhelmed by the fact that no one was trying to tax anything. As the evening wore on and the crowds began to thin, Kaelen and Nyx found themselves standing on a private observation balcony, looking out at the vast, silent expanse of the Ocularis Rim. The gas giant was a massive, swirling marble of color below them, and the stars were like a million tiny fires burning in the dark. Kaelen took a deep breath, the air tasting of life and the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens below. He looked back at the journey that had brought him here, from the gray, lonely booths of Checkpoint Alpha 9 to the center of a galactic revolution. I spent 34 years believing that the universe was an inventory list. I thought that if I could just label every box and file every form, I could keep the chaos at bay. I treated my own life like a cargo manifest, checking off the days without ever really looking at what was inside the crates. I thought being reliable was the same as being alive. I was wrong. Standing here now with the weight of 1,000 worlds on my shoulders and a Velran princess holding my hand, I realized that the most important things in life don't fit into a spreadsheet. You can't categorize the way your heart stops when someone smiles at you through the smoke of an explosion. You can't file the feeling of a soul link flaring to life in the middle of a dark, screaming void. I used to think that heroism was something that happened to other people, the big-name generals and the heavy hitters. But I've learned that heroism is just a series of small, inconvenient choices. It's the choice to run toward the fire when every instinct you have tells you to bug out. It's the choice to stay when it would be so much easier to leave. I'm still a clerk at heart. I still like things in their proper place. But I've realized that my proper place isn't behind a desk. It's wherever she is. We're all broken in our own way, all of us carrying silver fractures that we try to hide from the light. But those cracks, those are the places where the resonance of another person finally fits. We aren't defined by the things we lose or the scars we bear. We are defined by the people we choose to keep those scars for. I've stopped counting the days. I've started making the days count. And for the first time in my life, the manifest is finally, perfectly complete. Kaelen felt Nyx's hand tighten on his. She didn't need to hear the words. She could feel the resonance of his thoughts. She looked up at him, her violet eyes reflecting the distant stars. "Kaelen," she whispered. "Yeah, Nyx. What happens tomorrow?" Kaelen looked at the horizon, at the millions of possibilities waiting in the dark. A lopsided, peaceful grin spread across his face, the look of a man who was no longer afraid of the unknown. "Tomorrow," Kaelen said, "we wake up, we find some actual coffee that doesn't taste like a battery, and we figure out how to be a family. It's going to be a total disaster, Princess." "I can't wait," she laughed. They stood there for a long time, two souls bound by a choice that was stronger than any law. Below them, the station hummed with its new resilient frequency, a song of humans and aliens, of clerks and princesses, and of the beautiful, messy harmony that only happens when you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be together. Kaelen looked at the readers, his gray eyes thoughtful and bright, as if he were asking a question of the universe itself. "I spent my whole life waiting for the universe to tell me where I belonged, only to realize I had to build that place myself with the help of someone I never expected to meet. I wonder, in your own life, are you waiting for permission to be who you are? Or are you brave enough to look at your own fractures and realize they are exactly where someone else's strength is meant to fit?" He turned back to Nyx, his hand moving to the small data pad at his side, ready to start the first day of their new, chaotic, and perfectly imperfect history. Kaelen reached out and gently adjusted a single, stray braid of light in Nyx's hair. Then, with a quiet, confident movement, he began to organize the coffee cups on the balcony table into a perfectly straight line.